Good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome. Good to see you here this morning. If you lived in Ottawa on the south side last night, you might have heard fire trucks. Anybody hear fire trucks? Yeah. It was not a fire, just so you know. But what it was in fact, two of our own cross-bridgers, we have two teenagers that attend Ottawa High School that were down at the state wrestling championship down here at the University of Illinois over the weekend. Micah Kruger finished sixth place. He medaled in the 132-pound weight division. And Ethan Kruger finished second place, medaled in the 113-pound weight division. So would you give them a hand? Yeah. I actually went down and watched Thursday night and Friday, and man, I was so tempted to cancel church last night to go down and watch the other one, but I'm just teasing. But man, I tell you what, they were so fun to watch, so proud of them. If you see them walking around here, man, give them a high five, tell them great job. They worked really, really hard, and it paid off. And so it's always fun to celebrate our kids, isn't it? It is. You know, so we're in the midst of this series, Fixer Upper. And as we walk towards Easter, we talked about, this is the time for many of us where we've kind of practiced the whole Lent thing. And what that means is that we take a look inside and we just try to make a determination on where are some places in which we need some work. Where are some places in which Jesus needs to do something inside of us that maybe aren't just quite right, or are places in which we just know we don't look like him. And as we walk towards Easter, that's kind of the process. What we're doing as we move towards Easter at Crossbridge, we're looking at the Sermon on the Mount. And a very interesting sermon. We looked at it last week. In fact, if you're a guest and you weren't here, man, you can get on our website. You can go back to last week. It was kind of the introduction to the series. I'd encourage you to do that. But really, this morning, we're looking at Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 26. And be reminded, as we read this, the Sermon on the Mount, it's coming from this viewpoint that Jesus loves us enough that he wants us to experience the good life. Like he wants us to experience life at its absolute best. And so he tells us the truth. And as I said last week, the Sermon on the Mount's a really tough sermon. He says some really difficult things, some hard things that cause us to kind of take an inventory. And I'll tell you, that was my prayer for this series, that we would take an inventory. That we talked last week about giving Jesus the key, that he could take a look at our hearts, that he could literally remodel us from the inside out, that he could walk around and see exactly what needed work, and we'd be willing to listen. So let's take a look. Matthew chapter 5, verse 21. You've heard that our ancestors were told, you must not murder. If you commit murder, you're subject to judgment. But I say, even if you're angry with someone, you're subject to judgment. If you call someone an idiot, you're in danger of being brought before the court. And if you curse someone, you're in danger of the fires of hell. So if you're presenting a sacrifice at the altar in the temple and you suddenly remember that someone has something against you, leave your sacrifice there at the altar. Go and be reconciled to that person. Then come and offer your sacrifice to God. When you're on the way to the court with your adversary, settle your differences quickly. Otherwise, your accuser may hand you over to the judge, who will hand you over to an officer, and you'll be thrown into prison. And if that happens, you surely won't be free again until you've paid the last penny. Father, thank you again for today. I thank you that you are the one who can fix us, who desires to do a work within us. But Lord, even when we feel a mess, we recognize that when you live in us, that you are making us beautiful. God, we offer you the key today to this house, to the house, to our heart, in a way in which we say, take a look within us and help us to address the things that need to be addressed. Pray that you'd help me as I do my best to communicate. I pray that people will not hear my words today, but will hear yours. In Jesus' name, amen. So I played sports growing up, and I had some coaches that were, I would say, had some anger issues. Anybody ever had a coach with an anger issue? It happens sometimes, right? And so I remember I was on this baseball team, and this coach, he was pretty fiery. That's to put it lightly. And it was after a game, we'd played terrible, And I was in the dugout, and I was actually one of the youngest on the team. I was a freshman at the time, and I was sitting with these older kids, and really, I mean, I didn't do anything. I just sat the bench the whole game. And we were just getting it. I mean, he was letting us have it. And he was in there, and he took the bat, and he swung it, and he beat it on the concrete floor in that dugout. And it scared us all half to death. And then he just lit into us. And his words, I mean, they were taking the paint off the wall, if you know what I mean. And he was saying things that, would make anybody blush. And at the end of the rant, he just took out of the dugout. And he walked down the line of the fence like he was kind of pacing, like I guess trying to figure out, how to contain all this. And he walked down the line of the fence, and he came back, and he came in, and I thought we were going to get round two. Like, it was still, it was all over him. It was bright red. And he walked in, and he said, "Go, get out." And so everybody started to get out, and he said, "Kevin, stay." And I thought, what did I do? Like, did I carry the bat bag wrong? Like, what did I do? And I sat down, everybody left, and he looked at me with all seriousness, and it was kind of quiet, and he said, "How long was your mom behind the dugout?" I said, "What?" And he said, "Your mom. She's parked directly behind the dugout. How long was she back there?" I said, "I don't have any idea." And he said, "Will you apologize for me?" And I said, "Sure." And I left. And I look back at that. It was so funny now, right? But when he went on the walk, I know what he did. He went on the walk, and he was racing down that fence line. He turned around, and he noticed that my mom was waiting directly behind that dugout. And he knew she'd heard every word that he had said. And it's kind of comical now. But anger does that, right? Most of the time, anger leaves us like looking back in the aftermath saying, what did I just do? Right? You ever had that? I mean, sometimes anger is this thing in which almost we have this like out-of-body experience, right? We just lose it. It's like we kind of come out of ourselves, and then when we come back, we're like, what just happened? Right? I'm sure it's never happened to you. It's never happened to me either, right? Yeah, right. See, anger's been around since the beginning of time. Even you look back at Cain and Abel, when Cain killed his brother, it says, it started. He was angry, absolutely angry. But now say this before we really dive in. Anger isn't always bad. Okay, it's not always bad. Believe it or not, God was angry at times. In Psalm 7, it says, God is an honest judge. He is angry with the wicked every day. It also says in Psalm 145, the Lord is merciful and compassionate, slow to get angry, and filled with unfailing love. There's actually a good side to anger. In fact, I would call it a righteous anger. You ever heard that word? A righteous anger. In Nehemiah, there's a story that says, when I heard their complaints, I was very angry. After thinking it over, I spoke out against these nobles and officials. I told them, you're hurting your own relatives by charging interest when they borrow money. Then I called a public meeting to deal with the problem. If you look at Matthew, and many of us have talked about this scripture a number of times to justify our actions. It says, Jesus entered the temple and he began to drive out all the people buying and selling animals for sacrifice. He knocked over the tables of the money changers and the chairs of those selling doves. He said to them, the scriptures declare, my temple will be called a house of prayer, but you have turned it into a den of thieves. You remember that story? And oftentimes what we've done when we lose it, right? We're like, hey, I may have flipped the guy off on the road, but Jesus flipped the tables, right? It's not the same, okay? Not the same. See, when Jesus flipped the tables, it was because there was a good reason to it. He felt like they were defiling the temple. That it was one of those things he would say it was just wrong. When we talk about this righteous kind of anger, I remember when I was a kid and we were actually on vacation and my brother-in-law was with us, and my brother-in-law is kind of a fiery guy. In fact, sometimes he's battled with some anger things before, just like all of us have. I play a lot of golf with him, so I sometimes see it firsthand. And but I remember we were in a restaurant, and there was this family who was just sitting like right next to us, and it was a dad. He was a really large guy, and his wife, and these kids were all over the place, and they were loud, and they were causing a ruckus, and we've been there too, right? And all of a sudden, it was fine. They were rowdy, but I didn't think much of it as a kid, and before I knew it, I looked over and I caught the whole thing. The dad took the son's little guy. He's probably 8. took the kid's head and just went, boom, and smashed it right up against the wall. And it made this loud, like, terrible noise. And the kid, like, he didn't cry. He got stiff and quiet. And I remember, like, as a kid, I was like, oh, my. Like, that's never happened to me, you know? But I also remember, what I remember so clearly is my brother-in-law, who just about came out of his seat. And he gave this guy a look and locked eyes with him in a way which said, if you do that again, I'm going to come over and do that to you. And at the time, I mean, I'm trying to eat, you know? But at the time I thought, I'm going to see a fight in the middle of a restaurant, you know? But I tell you, that's righteous kind of anger. An anger that would say someone is oppressed, someone is abused, someone is hurt, and it's wrong, and we're not going to stand for it. There's all kinds of things we could kind of equate this to. You could equate it to, there's a group called MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, right? What is that? That's a righteous kind of anger that says, hey, I want to put a stop to this. We have a group here at the church. It's one of our families who has a group that really is against heroin. It's a very cool thing, and there's a number of folks that are a part of that. And you know what it is? It's the fact that they're saying, I hate this because it's killing people. See, there's a righteous kind of anger that when it's channeled in the right direction, it's a good thing. See, oftentimes, you know, I think most of us would like to say, oh yeah, Kevin, that's perfect, because every time I get mad, it's a righteous anger, right? That's usually not the case. It's usually not, most of us don't go, oh man, I just struggle. I got this righteous anger. It just happens all the time, right? No, it's usually the negative implications of anger that causes us the problems. It's usually what we're talking about. In fact, we deal with it in a number of ways. Some of us, we just deny it. Some of us are like, anger? You call me angry? I don't have an anger problem, you know? Others, like some of you, like, I don't know, maybe this is you have a very short wick, right? That like, you light the thing, boom. You light it, boom. I mean, there's never big explosions. They're just a bunch of little ones. You know, your friends, your family, everyone knows it. You know it. That's just how you operate. And then there's some of you have a very long wick. Like, you know, it just burns and burns and burns. But when it blows, look out, because you can take out blocks, right? Anyone? Any honest people? Yeah, you're like, that's me. I blow the roof off. Yep, about once every 6 months. See, no matter how we do it, no matter how we deal with it, anger's dangerous. It's a dangerous emotion when it gets out of hand. In fact, anger can be a killer. Think about this passage and what Jesus is saying. You've heard that ancestors were told, you must not murder. If you commit murder, you're subject to judgment. But I say, even if you're angry with someone, you're subject to judgment. If you call someone an idiot, you're in danger of being brought before the court. And if you curse someone, you're in danger of the fires of hell. So now you may say, Kevin, seriously? How is murder and anger connected? I mean, to me, those are very different things. Like, you know, I understand that murder is wrong, but really, anger? I mean, anger could cause this much, like, Jesus to get this upset? But see, I think it'd be fair to say that if you trace murder back to its very roots, that most of the time it probably started with a seed of anger. That Jesus is saying, hey, murder may be this big thing that we all recognize would be absolutely wrong, but don't underestimate anger, because anger can take you there eventually. That anger can be the very source of a lot bigger problem. In fact, James Bryan Smith, the book I've been reading, says Jesus understands that an angry person would actually harm someone if he or she could get away with it. You ever felt that way? Oh, if only I could, right? Right. That if we actually could get away with it, our anger would cause us to do things that we normally wouldn't do. You know, another view would be this, that sometimes our anger may not lead us to literally killing people, but our anger does lead us to kill people with our words. In fact, the NIV version, I was reading to you from the NLT version, but in another version it states this, in verse 22, again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, notice earlier I said idiot, right? But this version has a word, it says raqqa, is answerable to the court. Now, what is raqqa? What does that mean? Raqqa is a word that means empty, It means worthless. It means good for nothing. In fact, it was derived from this word, the root meaning that meant to spit. Okay? Can you picture that? So what we're seeing here, when we recognize, and I tell my kids this often. In fact, I just told my daughter this like a week ago. There's a passage in the Bible that talks about that every one of us are fearfully and wonderfully made. That's what God says about us, his creation. I told her, I said, hey, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. She looked at me like, yeah, right. But I'm going to tell her over and over because she is. And I'd say this. See, when we recognize that every person is fearfully and wonderfully made, that they're his. And then we look at them and call them worthless, good for nothing. And we literally, like, picture this. It's almost like spitting on his creation. That's why it makes him mad. That's why God says, Because the exact people that you are calling worthless and the exact people that you're calling good for nothing, the exact people that you'd rather just spit on, those are my creation. So what are some proper kinds of responses to anger? You know, and here's the thing. I'm going to run through just a few of them, and then I'm going to let you, maybe something will be helpful for you, and throw out the rest, okay? The first one will be this. I think when it comes to anger, especially in the church, with Christian folks, I think we just need to own it. Like I was reading something this week that said, Christians don't get angry. We don't do it. No, we get upset. Oh, I was really upset. Oh, I was really irritated. But we don't usually say, I was really angry. Because angry is like, it's like taking it up a notch. The other one sounds more righteous. I was upset. Yeah. You know, I was so upset I was throwing things, right? That's actually called anger, right? Right. And so sometimes I think it's just admitting it. It's okay to say, hey, you know what? Okay, I give. I'm angry. Like I was angry. Sometimes I think that's the start, right? That's the start of addressing it, just to admit that at times we struggle with it. The other thing I'd say that comes directly after that would be to discover its source. What is it that causes us to get so angry? I was actually doing some reading this week, and one of the things that I was reading was talking about that anger usually comes from this place of unmet expectations. When we have expectations, certain expectations, and it doesn't happen. You know, when you expect someone to show up and they don't. And then what happens is these unmet expectations, and then fear comes in. And what you have is full-blown anger. But here's what I'd tell you. Like, if you're a person and you say, Kevin, like, seriously, I really struggle with this, I think you need to do whatever you need to do to dig to the source, to figure out where's it coming from. You know, there's been times when, you know, and you've all been there, right? I mean, there's been times I can be walking through the house and I can step on a Lego, and I'm ready to, like, you know, I am yelling about that Lego. Gerald, pick up your Legos! It's really not about the Lego. There's many times when it's not about the Lego. And even he's looking at me like, seriously, Dad? The Lego? It's about something else. And even those moments that we have to step back, right? It's the moments which we step back and say, what is that? What just came roaring out of me like a lion? You know, when it probably should have been, it was over something minute. That's those moments when I think some of the best things we can do is just to take a time out, right? To take a time out, to step back. Oftentimes in the midst of anger, that's the best thing we can do. James 1:19-20 says, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. You know, that's a really hard verse. Because I don't know about you, but anger usually doesn't like come slowly. It usually, now I'll tell you, isn't it funny though? I mean, I can feel it. Can you feel it? It's almost like I can almost feel the blood kind of moving up when it's happening. You know, a funny story, which I didn't share last night, just a funny story kind of, just to be honest. So I'm writing this sermon, and I'm kind of one, like, I get distracted really easily. And so I'm in my office, and I'm writing, and I'm locked in, and I'm writing all this stuff down, and I mean, I'm on a roll, and I thought, I've got this thing. Like, because sometimes this can be stressful. You know, if you had to stand up and look at all you'd think it was stressful too. And so this can be stressful. And I'm writing this sermon, and all of a sudden, I get a phone call. And it was from my wife. I won't tell you what it was about, but she needed something at the moment. And it was serious. Like, she did need it. I understood. But I'll tell you, like, I was like, really? Like, now? And she was kind of in a tough spot, and she needed some help. So I was like, okay. So I hung the phone up, you know, and put my cell phone away, and I went out, and I got in the car, and I'm driving home to get what she needed, to take it where she was. And inside, I feel it. Mm-hmm. And inside, I was like, seriously? Why couldn't she have figured this out another way? Like, doesn't she know I'm in the middle of writing a sermon? She's going to throw the whole week off. Like, that's going to throw the whole thing off. And all of a sudden, I'm telling you, I'm driving across the south side, and the Lord said, really? Aren't you preaching on anger? You know? And I had to practice some of these things myself, you know? Like, one of the things that says, count to 10, right? I read that. Count to 10 when you're angry. If you're really angry, count to 100. If you need to go to 500, go to 500. Some of us need it. But it is interesting how it works. I mean, you can feel it coming. The other thing I'd say is quit stuffing it, right? Quit stuffing it. When you're on the way to the court with your adversary, settle your differences quickly. That's what it says. Settle your differences quickly. Don't let them linger. There's also a passage in Ephesians that says, and don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry, for anger gives a foothold to the devil. There's a reason why it says that. Because sometimes what we do is we say, oh, I'm just going to bed. It'll be better when I get up in the morning. And sometimes it feels like it is. But I can tell you from experience, the more we pack it in, the more we're angry about something, we go, no, it'll be okay. Pack it in. Just keep stuffing it. Eventually you stuff it so full that when it comes out, it comes out. Beware of that. There's a reason why it says this kind of thing. Even just letting it go. Scripture tells us that too, right? To get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. I read a quote this week that said, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Right? Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. You know, and I'll tell you this, really, sometimes I think our anger, especially when it's pointed at other people, and especially even when it's driven around the fact of sometimes expectations were not met, that sometimes we just got to let it go. That sometimes we hold people and we think, oh, and we hold them we can hold them for months, we can hold them for years. But I'll tell you something, a lot of times they don't even know you're holding them. I mean, they're walking around enjoying life, and you're walking around going, I can't stand them. And you're all in a turmoil, right? It's causing you all kinds of havoc. And sometimes it's a matter of just practicing forgiveness. Forgiveness, like real forgiveness. Forgiveness that lets the person go. And even it's interesting because when the Bible talks about forgiveness, I'm really convinced of this. I think it's less about the other person. I think it's about us. Because I think Jesus knows that when we hang on and we don't practice forgiveness, it's not really about them. It affects us in all kinds of negative ways. And the other thing that, a couple more here. One would be this, is to stop making excuses. You know, it's so easy to make excuses of why we're angry, of, you know, you don't have any idea. But can I tell you something? All of us, like when we were born, you didn't come out an angry baby. You know, like when people were showing up to see you at the hospital, they were like, oh, look at him. He's so angry. Can you look at that? You know, some of you are like, you don't know my kids, right? They were angry. No, there's things that have happened to us. There's things that have caused it. There's sources of this stuff, but we got to dig it up. We got to dig it up in a way in which we deal with it, so it stops damaging the relationships that we're in. So it stops just spilling out of us in all kinds of unhealthy ways. And then the final thing I'd say is you can do all these things and many, many more practical kinds of things. But I think the bottom line is asking Jesus for help. I don't think he would have talked about this and then said, hey, you're on your own. Hey, here's this deal with anger. Man, full blown, it can cause all kinds of havoc in your life. You know, it's like the root of murder, you know, like deal with this, and then, hey, good luck, go get them. See, when Jesus came to be with us, when Jesus came and offered, he died on the cross so we could have a relationship with God. It was so that he could walk with us and work on things like this, that he could help us along the way. See, I think the big picture is this. God cares about you, and he cares about how anger works in you and how it affects the relationships around you. You know, even one of the things that I think is interesting is anger is contagious. When you think about the people you have influence with, when I think about the people I have influence with, anger is always contagious. There's a verse that actually says it. It says, a gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words make tempers flare. You ever notice that when you're in a heated discussion, right? That when somebody, maybe it's not you, but when someone raises the volume just a little bit, just turn it up. What happens with the other person? Turn it up, right? And then what happens to the other person? Turn it. Next thing you know, like, man, it is on, right? It's what we do. See, relationships matter. In fact, in the midst of this passage, there was something that I really thought was interesting and very, very challenging. We're not going to practice this today, so don't sweat it. But it says this. So if you're presenting a sacrifice at the altar in the temple and you suddenly remember that someone has something against you, leave your sacrifice there at the altar. Go and be reconciled to that person. Then come and offer your sacrifice to God. See, what he's saying is it's one thing to be in right relationship with me, but to be in right relationship with me, you need to be in right relationship with each other. Boy, that's challenging. Because there's oftentimes what we say is, hey, God, man, we are good, but oh boy, you keep Sally out of my traffic, you know? I can't stand her, Lord. Help her. You got to fix her, right? And oftentimes I think what he's saying is, I want to fix you. I want to fix you because for you and me to be good here, you've got to be good here. As a kid, I grew up in church, and my dad was not a pastor. My mom was not either, but they might as well have been. And so we were there all the time. I went on Sunday morning, and then I'd have to go back on Sunday night, and then I had to go back on Wednesday night. And to be honest, as a kid, like I had overkill. And then I remember, it was one thing to do all that, and I kind of got in the rhythm of it. But I remember that once a year, we would have this thing called revival. Anybody ever heard of that? Uh-huh. And what would happen is some guest pastor would come into town, an evangelist, and he would preach, but he would do it all week long. So he would show up on Tuesday night, and he would preach Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday morning, Sunday night. And my parents, they made me go. And so every night I'd sit in there. And the difference between the guy who came in versus my own pastor was he spoke twice as long. I guess he knew he was leaving at the end of the week, so he had to get all his stuff in. And I mean, it was one long week for a young kid. But I remember one specific time where we were in revival, and this pastor was preaching, and he preached from right here. And he preached that passage of Scripture. And I remember at the end of the sermon, he said, hey, here's what I want you to do, all heads bowed. I don't want you to come to the altar today. If you have a problem with someone else in the room, I want you to leave and go and walk over to them and make it right. Now, as a young kid, I was about half asleep, for most of those services. But I remember standing there thinking, oh boy, this is going to get interesting. My eyes were open. I wanted to watch who was going to walk across that room. I grew up in a church where everyone was connected. There was a lot of family relationships. There was a lot of, imagine this, conflict in the church. There was some. And I just remember thinking, it is going to get good. And sure enough, it did. People started walking. Someone would walk over, and they were having, it's not like they had a microphone, but there was a conversation going on. And I watched that, and thinking back, I can't imagine doing that. Can you imagine? It's just a really, difficult thing. That's a difficult ask. And yet people did it. I think what it says, though, is it says that relationships, they matter. That a relationship with God is number one, but God would quickly say your relationship with each other is number two. And anger has potential to wreak havoc in the midst of our relationships. I have somebody that I play golf with, and they'll say it every once in a while when I hit one in the woods. They'll say, that's okay, they're making more as we play, right? I mean, it's not like there's ever a shortage on golf balls, right? See, relationships are not like golf balls. We don't, when one goes to the left or right, we don't just like discard it and say, we'll find another one. Relationships matter. And it matters that we're careful with them, and it matters that we do everything we can to reconcile them. When I think of anger, I hope what you've heard today, this is not a message in which I'm just trying to say, man, here's 6 things for you to do to make life better. I believe that anger, like when we really struggle with it, is something only Jesus can fix. And when it's really difficult for us, and we say, oh, Kevin, you don't understand. Like, man, my face can turn red in a moment's notice. That it's something Jesus has to work with us. Because it's a very difficult thing. But I'll tell you what, he doesn't want to work with you because he's just trying to be difficult on you, or he's trying to say, hey, you know what, like, I'm going to make you perfect. Like, that's not it. He cares about this because he knows it leads to bigger problems for you, and he wants you to live the absolute best life. He wants the best for you. Would you bow your heads with me?